Hi everyone. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it so early in the morning. I'm very excited to be here at Texas. And that's my first time being in Texas at all, and my second time presenting at a big camp, so don't judge me too strict. As you also noticed, English is not my first language, and I have been speaking English only 5% of my life. So if I make any mistakes, then please don't be so strict about them as well. Today we are going to be diving into an amazing adventure of custom imports in Drupal 8, and we will be covering the architecture of them and challenges that you may be facing, and also covering some cases in which you would not like to go with migrate that is moving into core, but would like to write something custom. But before we do this, let's talk a little bit about myself. So my name is Mykhailova, and I am a web developer at Digital Echidna, which is located in London, Ontario, Canada. And we specialize in just in Drupal, and we're quite a big company right now, 60 people out there. So I'm pleased to present today for you. All right, so you got a client that came to you and asked for an import. And you are facing a choice: do you want an import or do you want a migration? So you need to define some factors that will make you help to make you a decision. So first of all, you will consider why to go a custom import. So advantages of custom import: it is lightweight, and by lightweight I mean you optimizing your code completely. You don't rely on anything that somebody else wrote, and you can try to optimize the performance by using best practices, by extending classes, by loading only things and pieces that you need in this particular moment. If it's recurring, then probably you need some custom interface that will allow you to trigger import in a certain time, right? Some clients come to us and ask for the import that should occur every 30 seconds. So that would be very difficult to do with migration. It needs to be processed outside of cron. Why would you process something outside of cron? If the import is big enough, like let's say 500,000 of items, then it will never fit into one cron job. And if it's time sensitive, then you will have to figure out how you can fit the import without actually telling Drupal, hey, there is another cron job running, and basically putting down the server. So if the import can run on the ground, using as less resources of your server as possible, that would be your preferred goal. And then your custom import can update only when what needs to be updated. So you have this pixel perfect precision, if I can say that about data, when you and what you want to update. You don't have to load the entire entity in order to resave it. You can load the field and utilize entity API in Drupal core to actually save just these values. It can also be used with combined external sources. It's not a trivial task when you have a client that comes like, we have this, let's say, university programs that are stored in this XML file, and then the credits are stored in this CSV, and also we have this legacy database that is holding all the classrooms, and you have to put it all together and present in Drupal somehow. So in order to not write a very complicated migration trying to pull down all of the sources, in custom imports you can integrate it a little bit easier. And also you can handle unpublishing, deleting, or even garbage moderation tasks on your import. And it also can be scalable, because the approach I'll show you allows pretty much really huge imports, because we will not be able to pull big chunks of data into the memory. We will try to do it line by line by line, so it doesn't really overload your server. So once you figure this out and you answer it yes to some of these questions, or all of them, then you decide, okay, I will go with the custom import. Before you start your journey, talk to your client, and I can't stress it more. Some clients don't really have a good picture about what they want out of the top of their head. So sometimes they say, we just have this product, and they need to be put into the database. But they see it as a flat content type, right? And you say, okay, sure, you estimate as let's say 1 day of work, and we can even put feeds or a simple migration there. And then when you start realizing the complexity of it, the clients come in and says, well, we also would like to be able to filter this by some sort of a taxonomy. So you add the taxonomy. Oh, by the way, we have this provider content type. We want them to be linked to the products. Okay, that's now not flat anymore. Oh, we have these images in external server. We want to bring them in as well. So you need to talk to the client and figure out what will be the complexity, the final complexity of the solution you're trying to build. And the second one is when the clients see first time how amazing the import just brought the entire 10 years legacy database of their products into Drupal, they say, great, we have 10 more databases that we also want to bring into Drupal. So that's when the time of periodic or one time comes into play. Because if they say, but we have a team of people who manually entering our products in this legacy database, can we do now this automated in a Drupal? And you should be able to say yes if that question comes later on. That's why I think you always should plan for periodic functionality under the hood. And then you also need to ask the client, do they feel comfortable triggering the import? And when they want the import to be happening. So let's say the client is a big university and they want to do programs updates, and it needs to be happening midnight before the registration date. That's unlikely that somebody in the learning department will be sitting and waiting to press the button and run the batch process for you. So then you need something automated. And then you need to figure out the size of this automation to think, is that okay for the cron job? Or it's okay for the separate cron job? Or do you need something else, like continuous integration? So once you talk about all of that, touch base with the client about sources and your access to it. So you gather all of the requirements and you're ready to move forward. So what are your options? As we covered, there is simple one is manual import that is triggered by the client. So you just provide a simple UI that is basically a form with maybe some configuration options like URL to the sources and maybe time of the import. And then you click the button, it either creates your cron task or basically runs the batch import. Very simple, very understandable, requires some input from the client. Usually not good if the import is big enough, just because if the editor hits the trigger button, you run the batch process and there are 500,000 of items, they have to sit and wait and stare at this browser tab until the batch process goes away. So you can have a cron job, good option. Some hostings have strict limits on cron, so you can't really modify that much. Then you go to external cron solutions that can bring additional financial expenses to your client, so that might be not a good option. And then continuous integration. I'm using Jenkins just because I think Jenkins in general is cron on steroids and can do a lot of cool things. I don't do even half of the cool things that it can be doing, but all I'm doing is basically telling Jenkins to run my import, and we'll cover a little bit later how I do this. Your sources. Sources is an important and difficult task to talk to. Usually client IT department don't provide you with the structure that is suitable for Drupal. They have this maybe MS SQL database or any other legacy database or XML feed, something like that that is sitting there and it's completely not marketable, not ready for use, not ready for Drupal, and even in their own encoding. So you have to touch base with them and figure out what type of sources will be used, how they will be provided to you, and how they will be encoded. It's very funny how some ITs don't really understand the difference between UTF-8, UTF-16, and Unicode, and you have to go back and forth trying to explain them that you need really UTF-8. And also the data is usually not clean enough. People are pasting from Word, from Excel, from PDFs, from all over the place. So in order to not run into a lot of problems with encoding, it is a good idea to touch base with the client before you start building and discover and have some meetings around the source files. If you're still running into the problems of transforming your encoding into UTF-8, I recommend the library that's called Encoding. It's a PHP, can be installed through Composer, and it will clean up most of the problems for you, but not all. Then talk about the format. It can be JSON, CSV, XML. I would recommend to stick with JSON and CSV just because they support it very well and out of the box. XML can be tricky. If it's custom XML, there's a lot of custom schema and it's very nested. That can be very difficult for you to parse with simple XML. Even simple XML might not even, read it correctly or see it as an XML file. So I would suggest to use QueryPath. That's another library that you can install with Composer that works exactly like jQuery and basically allows you to parse it doing normal like jQuery-like queries of tags and selectors. Then you talk to your IT people about what external sources, how they will be provided. Is it a feed? Will the URLs always be accessible? Are they going to be updated at a certain time? Are there any webhooks to let you know that the feed got updated? Is it external DB? Do you need a certain, modules installed on a server to be able to query this DB? Is it an external file server? Do you need an SFTP library and things like that? So the easiest solution, if you can convince an IT people to just drop files into your server, that would be the best solution. If it's something other than that, you may see a problem of missing some modules or missing libraries that allow you to actually log in to the external source. Yeah.
So you mentioned two different tools or modules that aren't on the slide. What were the names of them? One of them was something query.
One is QueryPath. QueryPath.
Oh, parse.
Yes. And another one is encoding. Yeah, I can show you later in the browser 2 pages for this one.
Okay, great.
When we get to Q&A.
Great.
So once you're done with the sources, it's time to think about the architecture. So everything starts with structure. As I mentioned in my first examples, think about content type, architecture, and structure. So think about fields the client would like to present on the front end of the site, but also think about helper fields for you. So like unique identifiers, any taxonomy or filters that may allow you to build more, advanced views. Think about translations. Is it ever going to be translatable? And if so, how the translations will fit into your sources? Is it going to be one row, one translations? Is it 2 translations in one row? So think about this one. And also think about the volume of the import. If it's too big, then probably you don't want to save everything in node table. Because if you create in nodes, then you basically taking away resources from the site when it comes to regular content types. Let's say you just dumped in 2,000 records of nodes, and then next day you put another 2,000. So the nodes table is growing and growing and growing. So when you create queries for the normal nodes, like basic pages, articles, usual stuff, you will not be able to query as effectively and as fast, even though they're indexed, that you can see the performance drop. So literally I tested with 200,000 nodes and then with 400,000 nodes, and I could see that the query time just grows to half seconds every time. And think about file feed structure. So you grab your CSV files that the client provided to you, examine all of the column names, and think if the column names don't have anything special, so special characters, anything that PHP might not like ampersands, dashes, M dashes, quotations, anything in them that needs to be stripped out. And the second big part of it, you need to talk to the IT person and tells them that the name of the column should not change. So if you're using this for identifying which field goes where in Drupal, if they change that, the import breaks. It will never be able to find the correct field anymore. And also get access credentials. Some companies are very strict about what access rights they give you, so maybe you will never be able to pull without the root access. And they give you just some sort of a read access, and you can't really do anything with the feed or with the files. So finding the right key is determine how you will access the data. What external libraries you need to access the data. There is a bunch of external libraries for SFTP connection. However, all of them may present some issues, especially if SFTP uses some custom ports or anything like that. So try to avoid that. Check if curl installed on the server, because if the clients host themselves, you can be surprised how many things are very different from what we used to have on like normal setup on like big hosting companies. Check about any other special modules that are installed and Apache permissions and your Apache user permissions, because the setup may be very challenging for you to set up any sort of recurrent background import. The foundation of the import is very simple. So when you gather all of the requirements, it's really just 3 steps process, and it's very easy to pull on together. So that is as easy as you get data, you parse data, and you save data. The problems can be the time of the import, so the volume of the import, and resources of your server. To avoid all of these problems, we will go with approach of 3 queues. So the first queue, all it will do, it will just check if we have the data available. And if we do, we will just grab the data in the big curl request, and we'll just store it in the getter queue. So let's say you have 5 files, and you basically grab curl for each of these 5 files, and you store it in the getter queue as a big blob. You don't care what is in the data. As long as the data is there, you don't validate, you don't do anything, it's there, drop it as a blob in Drupal, and wait. Why? Well, curl requests are usually quite fast, so your server will not notice, and it will wait until it have more resources to grab these queue items and start processing. So if it is free and has time right now to process, it will grab this queue item and say, okay, I'm processing it now. What's the advantage? You don't hold this big volume of data in your memory. It's sitting in the database, and it will be ready for you when you need it. So then, when you start in processing the getter queue, you grab one file, big blob, and all you need to do is check, is it valid, and parse it into multiple rows of data. So each row of your CSV file will be one record in the setter queue. You don't have to save entities right away. It's a lot of resources, right? You have to parse the rows themselves as well. So all you need to do is make out of big blob chunks of data and save them in a setter queue. Once then done, your server as well can wait until it has time to process your setter queue. That means that if something fails, import will pick up from the point it stopped. So getting into the queue items, you don't hold 5, 10, 20 files in memory. You get into each file whenever you have time. So the point of that is every single item will always process in linear order. It will get from the big blob into the setter queue, then into the Drupal. It will always get linear. However, you can process all of these queue items in parallel if you have enough resources. Or you can wait and have enough time for the server to pick up from the point where it stopped. So you're not losing any information. You're also not taking away your memory resources. Once it's up to the setter queue, you grab this big row of information and you split it into smaller chunks of fields, right? You parse it into your content type and you save the content type. And that's it, you're done. Basically 3 steps: get the data, parse the data, and save the data. So how to do this with Drupal code? You think about the trigger of the import. And with Touchbase, it can be manual or it can be automated. So if it's manual, you just need a custom form. It can be as small as a form with one button saying trigger the import, and it will start a batch process on the batch API. And then batch API will be feed the queue, the getter queue, and it will just grab the queue out, and then the getter queue populates itself as setter queue, and then a setter queue will save in return your record. So your batch process will only contain of 3 operations of just getting these 3 files, and that's it. So it will be very fast. Nobody will be sitting and waiting till it ends. Or it can be on background cron job or a dash command. The advantages of having it as a dash command is that you will be able to execute it anytime you want with any sort of a continuous integration. So let's say Jenkins. So all you do for Jenkins is say, Jenkins, at a certain time, just grab my dash command and run it. And it will do exactly what your custom form is doing. It will populate your getter queue, and that in turn will populate your setter queue and save the information. So now, how it's done with the real code. So as you can imagine, these 2 parts of code are actually not supposed to be in one file. I just put them together for the slides purposes. So the top part is a class, which is a simple form. I'm just extending configuration form base in case I want some sort of configuration, like set it to run overnight. You can put the configuration options there. And then, as I said, you just populate in the queue. I say it will be manual because I triggered it manually. And then you submit the form to save your configuration option. In the dash command, you just define your dash command as if you would do in Drupal 7. Nothing special there. And you tell what callback to run. Now, when you have your getter queue, I like the ability in Drupal 8 to extend classes. The solution that is presented there, it's pretty good in terms of every single line of your code in the getter queue lives in the base class. And then you have your cron class and you have a manual class. They are actually like that. I didn't delete anything from there. All you need is one line of code and then metadata defined as a plugin, so they can be recognized by Drupal. What's the point of it? You don't repeat yourself, but you now have the ability to run the queue by cron or run it manually, which is, I think, it's very powerful. If you need to make a change, you make it just in one place. You don't have to do it in multiple places. Then in a base class, you have your process item function, where you basically will do all of the calculation. And I didn't include anything special here because it will wear out, basically on what you have as your data source. Is it going to be feed or is it going to be CSV? So it will be different from, import to import. But the idea is that this function, process item, needs to populate a setter queue. After setter queue is populated, we have the same approach here. You basically parsing everything and saving, and everything lives in the base class. And if you need to change something for whatever reason in the manual or cron class, you can do that. But you basically extend all of that, and you have cron plugin, and you have manual plugin. And that's it. You got the import. Questions? I will find real quick for you the libraries. So this is the query path one, that you can query the XML. It also queries HTML. And this one allows you to clean up your encoding.
What's it called?
It's called Force UTF-8 encoding. The class is called encoding. It seems like Force UTF-8 is a namespace they're using. Okay. That's it. Any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, are you doing, obviously if you're doing importing during normal business hours, you do anything where you're kind of putting in delays and interleaving the processing so that you're not sapping the system resources? I mean, if it's at night or something, because if you're a global company, you're not going to have that privilege, and you've got to do it. Do you do anything in Jenkins to actually interleave?
Yeah, you can say in stops in Jenkins, as well as because we are basically chunk it up into 3 stages. Each stage takes not a lot of time. You don't have big bulk of data saving at once. You have just small. So one node save is usually very fast, right? So this is what you do. So spread in time, you do multiple node saves. So you don't do like, I have 5,000 nodes saved right now, right? You do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the server doesn't really notice it. Make sense?
You don't have to just use one server, though. We have servers. We actually have a pool of servers. We moved to something like this for a Drupal 7 site where we're using queues for everything. Mm-hmm. And you can have, there's a couple of Drush plugins, especially for like 7. I don't know for 8 yet, but where they will just sit there and churn through the queue, and they'll process things in essentially real time, where we've gotten to the point where if there's an API call that takes amount of time, we'll just pop it onto the queue, and it may be another page load or 2 before that queue gets processed, but we've got potentially 2 or 3 servers that are just sitting there going through. The other thing, she mentioned making one queue, but you can make multiple queues and go through and add things to 2, 3, 4, make a queue for each runner that you're building, and you can parallel it out.
Yeah, or you can process multiple queue items.
Saturate your database.
Yeah. You can also grab, like if you have multiple servers, it doesn't have to claim items, just one server doesn't have to claim one item. You can claim items from multiple runners as well. It just will grab the next one and just process in parallel. So it will, like the server, the idea is why we chunk it out that much and why we're using queues. The idea is the server doesn't really notice it. Instead of when we have in a bulk and we have to do all at once. Or this is when it actually notices that something's happening.
So in your Drush command, are you telling it, you pass in any kind of parameters that indicate how many records you want to process every time you want to?
You can do that, but I prefer doing it in a Jenkins script instead of doing it in Drush command.
Okay.
Yeah, so we had like one site as well was a big university site, and we had to do indexing of Solar as well, which took a lot of time. So we told in the Jenkins job to stop, where a certain time limit actually comes in, which is like stop, restart, stop, restart, and this is how we got everything processed. Otherwise, when we didn't have this approach, we ended up with a lot of items that we were running on cron, and we ended up with a lot of items that were not processed, and then we were just going away. So we were sitting records in the database that have never got into.
Another question?
Yeah.
So how do you handle the records that, when you're parsing the blob and you've got records that are failing your validation? I assume you're marking that in the queue, right, whether it's a valid or invalid. And what do you typically do there? Do you just produce a report or...
So basically, if the record is invalid, it will never get to the setter queue, right. So it will never take this resource. But what I do, I usually create a logger error, and then we can generate a view of this logger error for admin later on to check and say, oh, this unique ID didn't parse because I saw this and this and this validation problems. Oh, I can regenerate them and maybe re-upload a smaller CSV and just update these records later on. That's what we do. Any other questions?
One other one, I guess. Sorry.
It's okay.
Do you ever use the migrate any of the migrate API?
Oh yeah, we're running normal migrations for like projects. The problem that with migrate is usually or typically you do it once when you're migrating from another site, but when it's happening on a recurrent basis, it's not as flexible as custom solution. That's what we found, especially on some imports we have to do every 30 seconds, or we have to, as he mentioned, like, queue the call to the API, or do something very specific and very custom that migrate is not educated about. But I mean, it doesn't have plugins, it doesn't have source and destination, So instead of writing all of that into migrate and trying to fit it into contrib, we found it was easy at the time to actually do absolutely custom processing and control it exactly the way we want instead of using migrate API. So this solution is only for very specific large-scale custom cases that cannot fit into usual migrate. Because if you have like a normal, CSV import, then use migrate CSV class and everything will be fine. So it comes to custom when it goes into something very extreme and very specific you need to solve, right? So like a volume, time to the call of the API, resources of your servers, or the need to process on multiple servers, something like that. Then you go from migrate to custom solution.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You do the same thing with the feeds module, right?
Yeah.
But in your case, you won't be able to queue the content that's coming in, right? That's the whole idea of doing it custom.
Yeah, well, feeds, we did with feeds as well. The problem with feeds is, first of all, on D8 they're not as great. And the point when I was writing this, feeds were not ready for D8. And the second one, feeds also have timeouts. So when you have big records, it seems like it times out, it errors out, and it's really hard. Like, you can write tempers, you can write custom plugins for feeds as well, you can hook into them, but if you need to pre-process the data in a very special way, or if you have a very custom specific XML or multiple different sources, not just CSV, but your data is coming from 20 XML files. Each one has different schema. Or it's coming from CSV and an XML, and you need to merge it together in order to optimize resources and save it once. Then you can't go with feeds. You'll have to go with one feed, then trigger another feed. So, and another problem with feeds was that some hostings, especially like container-based hostings, they don't allow background processes, just because the container goes away and it loses the ID of the container, so the connection gets lost, and then it doesn't allow us to run feeds on background. So in order to avoid all of that, we came out like, okay, we get out of Drupal. In Drupal Bootstrap, you get the trash command in there, and we basically tell Jenkins to, do everything for us instead of having feeds in there. Does that make sense?
Feeds doesn't use the batch API.
Yeah. Well, they do to some extent. It just, the point is, when, for example, you do the XML parsing, the behavior I noticed, it will create small records of XML part, and then it will map it into the nodes. So when it creates the records of parts XML, instead of having it on a batch, it sits in there processing this big blob of data. And then when it creates nodes, it creates a batch. So at the point of processing this big chunk of XML, it actually timed out on us multiple times, and we continuously changed the timeout variable, but then it was not stable for the client. It was quite scary for us to continue with this approach. Yeah.
Did you wind up building a custom entity to store your data at the end?
Yeah. So we had an import that holds basically every night it comes around 500,000 items. We had to hold in custom entity, just because and it's fieldable, but fieldable not through the UI, through the backend. Just because when we created it as a normal node, it just Drupal choke up on the amount of data in the node table, plus it created these tables for every field, which is not optimal at all. And then when you try to put it in a view, it just dies. That's it. So in order to avoid all of that, we created custom entity, and then we put the custom entity into the view, and everything is in one table. Is way more optimized than having like 1,000 table for fields. We also had a lot of fields in this entity, unfortunately. Yeah, that is it.
And you said at one point in your early slides that one of the approaches or pros for doing this way was that you could only update specific fields if you wanted to.
Yeah.
How is that done in the code that you were talking about? Like, oh, I just want to update like a title field or something.
Well, if you have a custom entity, you just you don't load the entire entity, you just load that field, or you just query out this table if you need to. I try to avoid this approach, but in the end of the day, you just update this field value and you save.
Okay, and that would be like a very specific import for, say, just updating
Yes.
one field versus
Yes.
like the import.
But you have the control, right? You don't have to set everything. You can have specific, even in this configuration form, you can put it just title update or just image update, and you can do this. Yeah, that's it. If you have any other questions, I am available for the half of the day, and then unfortunately I have to fly back home. So yeah, you can find me and talk to me later. Thank you very much for coming. It was a big pleasure.
Thank you.